The rain outside the hospital window had been falling for hours, soft but endless, like the quiet grief inside the room. The man sitting near the hospital bed had barely moved since morning. His suit, once neatly pressed, was now wrinkled and stained with coffee marks. His tired eyes stayed fixed on the motionless figure lying in the bed, his only daughter. She had been in a coma for weeks. Machines around her beeped steadily, a cold rhythm that had become the sound of his days and nights. The doctors had done everything they could. Specialists from other cities had been called in, but nothing changed. She slept as if trapped in another world, unreachable no matter how much he begged or prayed. He had been called a powerful man his whole life. People used to say his name with respect and sometimes fear. He built companies, signed deals, and made headlines. But now none of that mattered. What good was all his money when he couldn't bring back the light in his daughter's eyes? He whispered to her every morning, trying to keep his voice steady. "Good morning, sweetheart. It's Dad, the sun is out today. Well, almost." He'd pause, searching her face for any tiny sign of movement. "You'll wake up soon. I know you will." Every night when the nurses changed shifts, he stayed behind. He couldn't bear to leave. Some nights he would fall asleep in the chair beside her, holding her hand, waking up with his back aching but his heart refusing to rest. Outside the hospital walls, the city moved on as usual. Cars rushed past, people went to work. Laughter filled coffee shops. But for him, time had stopped the moment the accident happened. The only time he left the room was late at night when he needed air. That evening, the rain came down harder than usual. The smell of wet pavement mixed with the faint scent of hospital disinfectant. He pulled his coat tighter and walked toward the gate, lost in thought. That's when he noticed someone sitting near the hospital wall, half hidden behind a small tree. It was a young girl, probably in her early 20s. Her clothes were torn, her hair soaked, and her thin hands were wrapped around herself as she tried to stay warm. A small plastic bag beside her looked like it held everything she owned. He stopped, unsure why he felt the need to look twice. Maybe it was her eyes. They looked tired but not empty. There was something alive in them, something he hadn't seen in a while. Hope, maybe, or courage. Without thinking too much, he walked closer. "You shouldn't be out here in this weather," he said quietly. His voice came out rough, unused to gentle words. The girl looked up, startled. "I'm fine, sir," she said quickly. Just waiting for the rain to stop, he took off his coat and handed it to her. "Here, take this." Her eyes widened. "No, sir, I can't. Please," he interrupted softly. "Just take it. It's cold." After a moment, she reached out slowly and accepted it. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. He nodded and turned to leave, but she called out, "Sir, you look sad." He stopped. It had been a long time since anyone asked him how he felt. Not even the doctors or nurses dared to. They spoke to him with formality, careful not to say the wrong thing to a powerful man. He gave a tired smile. "Sad is one word for it," she tilted her head. "Someone in the hospital?" He didn't know why, but he found himself answering. "My daughter," he said. "She's been asleep for weeks. The doctors say there's not much hope." The girl looked down, her hands clutching the coat tightly. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must hurt a lot." He stared at her for a long moment. Something about her voice, simple, sincere, broke through the wall he'd built around himself. He nodded slowly. "It does." Then she looked up again, and what she said next stopped him completely. "Sir," she said quietly, "I can rouse your daughter." For a second he thought he misheard her. "What?" "I can wake her," she repeated, her tone calm but confident. "Let me try." He blinked, caught between disbelief and shock. "You? You're saying you can do what doctors can't?" She didn't flinch. "Not like doctors do. But I know how to reach people who can't hear us anymore. Sometimes it's not medicine they need, it's a voice." He almost laughed, but the sound never came. He was too exhausted to argue, too broken to get angry. He just stared at her, searching for some sign that she was joking or mad. But her eyes didn't waver. "You don't even know my daughter," he said finally. "I don't have to," she replied softly. "But I can try. You've tried everything else, haven't you?" Her words hit him hard. Yes, he had tried everything: doctors, specialists, therapy, prayers, money. Everything but faith in something simple and human. He hesitated for a long time. Maybe she was just another desperate person looking for a way to survive. Maybe she didn't mean harm. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. If I let you in and you do anything that upsets her, I won't, she said quickly. I promise. He didn't answer right away. The rain softened, turning into a mist. Somewhere inside, a voice told him this was foolish. But another voice, the part of him that still hoped, told him to take the risk. Come with me, he said quietly. The girl followed him inside. The hospital lights were bright, almost blinding after the darkness outside. Nurses stared as they walked through the hallway. A few whispered to each other, confused by the sight of a homeless girl walking beside a man known for his wealth and pride. He ignored the looks. When they reached his daughter's room, the girl stopped at the door, her eyes wide as she saw the machines and wires. She stepped closer, slowly, as if afraid to disturb the silence. That's her, the man said quietly. His voice trembled slightly. Her name is... He stopped himself. Saying her name felt too painful. She's been like this for almost a month. The girl walked to the bedside. Her steps were light, careful. She looked at the girl lying still, pale against the white sheets. For a moment she said nothing. Then she turned to the father. Can I sit beside her? He nodded, though his heart was pounding. The girl pulled up a chair and sat down. She reached out and gently took the patient's hand. Her touch was soft, almost reverent. Then she spoke, her voice calm and full of warmth. Hey, she whispered. I don't know if you can hear me. My name doesn't matter. But your dad is right here. He hasn't left you for a single day. He keeps waiting for you to open your eyes. The man stood near the door, frozen. You must be tired, the girl continued. But he's tired too. He misses you more than you can imagine. So if you can, please, try to come back. Even if it's just for a moment. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the machines. The billionaire felt his throat tighten. He wanted to tell her to stop, that this was useless, but he couldn't speak. The girl closed her eyes and stayed like that for a long time, holding the patient's hand and whispering softly. The father couldn't make out all her words, but there was something peaceful in her tone, something that filled the room with warmth he hadn't felt in weeks. After a few minutes, she looked up and said, I can't promise anything. But she heard me. I can feel it, he frowned. You can feel it? Yes, she said simply. Sometimes hearts listen before the body does. He didn't know what to say. It sounded foolish, yet deep down he wanted to believe her. When she stood up to leave, she placed his coat back on the chair. Keep it, he said. You'll need it, she shook her head. I'll be fine, but I'll come back tomorrow if that's okay. He looked at her for a long time before nodding. All right, tomorrow. She gave a small smile and walked out into the night. When she was gone, he turned back to his daughter. He thought he imagined it at first, but for a brief second he saw her finger twitch. His heart jumped, his breath caught. He leaned closer, calling her name. Nothing. The room was still again. Maybe it was just a reflex. Or maybe it wasn't. He sat down and stayed awake till morning, holding her hand, replaying every word the strange girl had said. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel completely hopeless. Something inside him, something small but real, had started to stir again. The next morning, sunlight poured through the hospital window, bright and warm, but the man barely noticed. He had sat in the same position all night, watching his daughter's hand, waiting for another small sign. That tiny twitch he saw still echoed in his mind, like a memory he couldn't decide to trust or doubt. Maybe it was real. Maybe it wasn't. But it gave him something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. When the nurse entered to check the monitors, she found him awake, eyes red but alert. Sir, you should rest, she said softly. You've been here all night again. He nodded but didn't move. Did you notice any change? Her pulse, her movements? She looked at the chart. Everything's stable. No new changes, but stable is good. He forced a small smile. Stable. It was the word he'd come to hate. It meant no worse but no better. It meant waiting. After the nurse left, he stood up and stretched his stiff legs. The coat that he had given the girl last night still hung over the back of the chair. She had left it neatly folded like a small act of respect. For some reason, that simple gesture touched him deeply. He didn't even know her name. Later that afternoon, as he was talking to one of the doctors, a faint knock came at the door. When he turned, he saw her standing there, clean but still in the same worn clothes. Her hair was tied back, and though she looked tired, there was a quiet determination in her eyes. "Sir," she said softly, "you said I could come back." The doctor frowned immediately. "Who is this?" he asked sharply. "This is a restricted area. She's with me," the man said quickly, raising his hand. "It's all right," the doctor hesitated, clearly confused. "Sir, this isn't wise. We can't allow—" "I said it's fine," the man repeated, his tone calm but firm. The doctor sighed, gave the girl a cautious look, and left the room. The man turned back to her. "You really came back?" "I said I would," she replied quietly. "I don't break promises." He nodded, gesturing to the chair beside the bed. "She's the same." No change. The girl moved closer, her steps light. She sat down, gently took the sleeping girl's hand, and looked at her face. "She's fighting," she whispered. "You just can't see it." He crossed his arms, watching her closely. "What makes you so sure?" "Because I've seen it before," she said. "Sometimes people get lost inside their pain. They need something familiar to guide them back." He didn't understand what she meant, but he didn't interrupt. For the next hour, she sat there talking to the unconscious girl, telling her small stories about the sound of rain, about how the world smells after a storm, about the warmth of sunlight through a window. Her voice was gentle, soothing, filled with life. He found himself sitting quietly, listening, as though her words were healing something inside him too. At one point, she looked at him and said, "Do you mind playing her favorite music? Something she loved before all this?" He blinked, surprised. "Music? I haven't thought of that." "Sound has power," she said softly. "It reminds the heart where home is." He hesitated for a moment, then took out his phone, searching through old playlists. He finally found a song his daughter used to play endlessly in the car. The melody filled the room, soft, emotional, full of memories. As the notes played, he watched the girl's face for any sign of reaction. And then it happened again. Her fingers moved slightly, just for a second. He gasped. "Did you see that?" The homeless girl smiled faintly. "Yes." She heard something familiar. Tears welled up in his eyes, though he tried to hold them back. "You think she's really in there?" "Listening?" "I know she is," the girl said. "But she's scared. She needs to feel safe to return." The man sat down slowly, his mind spinning. "I don't even know who you are," he said after a long pause. "Why are you doing this?" She looked down, hesitating before answering. "Because someone once did the same for me." That answer left him speechless. When visiting hours ended, the nurses reminded them to leave. The girl stood up quietly. "I'll come again tomorrow," she said. "Don't lose hope tonight." He nodded, his voice soft. "Thank you." After she left, he stayed beside his daughter, holding her hand while the music played again. For the first time in weeks, the room didn't feel so cold. The next day, she returned again, this time bringing a small paper bag. "What's that?" he asked. "Something sweet," she said with a shy smile. "Hospitals smell too much like sadness. I thought we could change that." Inside the bag were 2 small bread rolls and a cup of coffee she'd somehow managed to get. He didn't ask how. They shared it quietly, both sitting near the bed. It was the first time he had eaten without feeling sick inside. When she started talking to his daughter again, he listened more closely. Her words weren't special, just small, real moments. She told stories about how she used to watch birds in the park, how she once found a kitten and named it Sky, how she believed that even broken people could bring light to others. At one point, he asked her gently, "Where do you stay? Do you have family?" She looked away for a moment, then said softly, "Nowhere, really. I used to stay with my sister. She was sick for a long time. But when she stopped, swallowing hard. When she left, I couldn't stay there anymore." He understood the pain in her voice instantly. He didn't press further. That evening, when she was leaving, the nurse stopped her outside the door. "You're not supposed to be here every day," the nurse said kindly. "This isn't allowed." The man appeared behind her before she could reply. "She's helping my daughter," he said firmly. "If she wants to come, she stays." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "All right, sir. But please keep it quiet." As days passed, the girl became a familiar sight in the hospital. The staff whispered about her. The mysterious young woman who spoke to the billionaire's daughter. Some thought he had lost his mind. Others thought she was just lucky. But the man didn't care what they said. All he cared about were the tiny changes. His daughter's breathing became stronger. her hand movements more frequent. Each time it happened, the homeless girl smiled softly as if she already knew it would. One night, after a long day, he walked her out to the gate. The air was cold and streetlights flickered in the distance. "You shouldn't sleep outside," he said quietly. "At least take some money. Find a room for the night." She shook her head. "I can't take your money." "This isn't charity," he said. "It's thanks," but she still refused. "If I take it, you'll think I came for that." And I didn't. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're different," he said finally. She smiled faintly. "Different isn't always bad." The next morning, something remarkable happened. When she entered the room and greeted the unconscious girl like she always did, the monitors picked up a sudden change. The pulse quickened and a faint flicker passed across the girl's eyelids. The billionaire froze. "Did you see that?" he whispered, afraid to move. The girl nodded calmly. "She's close. Just a little more." They spent the rest of the day by her side, speaking softly, playing familiar songs, keeping her surrounded by warmth and voices filled with care. The doctors couldn't explain it, but they admitted she was improving. That night, as he watched his daughter sleep, the man felt a deep gratitude he didn't know how to express. He turned to the girl who sat quietly near the bed. "I don't know what kind of miracle this is," he said, "but I'm glad you walked into our lives." She smiled faintly, looking at the sleeping girl. "Sometimes miracles don't come from heaven," she said. "They come from people who refuse to give up." He studied her face for a long moment, wondering how someone who had so little could carry so much light inside her. As the clock ticked past midnight, he realized something else. This girl, who once had nothing, had somehow given him the one thing money couldn't buy: hope. He stayed awake long after she left, replaying her words in his mind. The hospital room, once filled with silence and despair, now felt alive again. The faint hum of machines no longer sounded like reminders of pain, but like steady beats of faith. The next day would bring more change. He could feel it. But for now, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his daughter was hearing every word, following that gentle voice back toward the world she left behind. And deep inside, for the first time in a long while, he whispered a quiet thank you. To the girl, to fate, to whatever unseen force had brought her there that night in the rain. The following days brought a quiet kind of hope that filled the hospital room like morning light. Every time the man came in, he saw something new. A slight twitch, a change in breathing, or a hint of warmth returning to his daughter's skin. The doctors couldn't explain it, but they admitted something unusual was happening. The homeless girl kept coming every day. She never asked for anything. She didn't even sit unless he asked her to. She would just stand beside the bed, take the girl's hand gently and start talking. Sometimes she told stories, sometimes she sang softly, and sometimes she simply sat in silence, her hand resting on the patient's arm, as if her presence alone carried comfort. The billionaire had grown used to her voice. There was something about the way she spoke, slow, careful, honest. Her words didn't sound like prayer or therapy. They sounded like someone who understood pain. He started to wonder who she really was and what kind of life she had lived before ending up on the streets. One afternoon, he found her sitting quietly by the window, humming a tune. The sunlight fell across her face, and for the first time, he noticed how young she really was. Her clothes were still old, her hands rough from life outside, but there was a calm strength in her that no hardship could take away. "You seem very sure she'll wake up," he said. Sitting down beside her, she smiled faintly. "I am. What makes you believe that?" She turned her head slightly, still looking at the bed. "Because sometimes people just need someone to believe for them." Her answer stayed with him all day. Later that evening, he got a call from one of his business partners, insisting he come to the office. He refused. The company had run without him for weeks. The world outside could wait. His world was in that hospital room next to the person who made him human again. When night came, the girl was still there. She had asked for permission to stay a little longer. The nurses allowed it, though they looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect now. Something about her had changed in their eyes, too. As the room grew quiet, the homeless girl started to sing again. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying a tune that felt like a memory. The man listened with his eyes closed, not because he wanted to sleep, but because he didn't want to miss the feeling that her voice brought: warmth, calm, and something deeper than words. Then it happened. The patient's hand moved again, but this time not slightly. It moved with intent, a slow but clear squeeze. The man jumped up from his chair, his heart racing. "She moved," he cried out. The girl smiled without surprise. "I told you she could hear us." He rushed to the bed, calling softly, "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" "It's Dad." There was no response, but her breathing grew stronger, more natural. He pressed the call button for the nurse, his hands shaking. When the nurse came in, she froze, eyes wide. "Her vitals are improving," she said. This is remarkable." The doctors were called in, tests were done, and though they said it was too early to celebrate, the man could see it in their faces. They were amazed. Something real was happening. When things settled down, he turned to the girl. "What did you do?" She shook her head. "Nothing magic. I just reminded her she's loved." He looked at her, speechless. He wanted to thank her, but no words felt enough. Over the next few days, the improvement continued. The billionaire began to smile again, the kind of smile that comes from deep relief. He brought food for the girl every day, but she only ate a little, saving most of it for later. When he asked why, she said simply, "There's always someone hungrier than me." He had met thousands of people in his life, investors, politicians, leaders, but none like her. There was something pure about her kindness, something that couldn't be bought or measured. One morning, while she was talking to his daughter, he quietly stepped outside to make a call. He wanted to find her a place to stay, maybe even a small apartment. He didn't want her sleeping outside anymore, but when he came back, he found her sitting silently, her hands folded in her lap, eyes wet. "What's wrong?" he asked. She wiped her tears quickly. "I just remembered someone," she said softly. "Someone who never got a second chance." He waited for her to explain. "I had a sister," she continued after a pause. "She got sick when we were young. We didn't have money for doctors. I used to sit by her bed every day, holding her hand and talking, hoping she'd wake up. And one day she did, just for a moment. She smiled, said my name, and then her voice broke. She didn't finish the sentence. The man sat down beside her quietly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "It's okay. I think maybe helping your daughter is my way of finishing what I couldn't do back then." He felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her she had already done enough, but before he could speak, his daughter's fingers moved again. This time, the movement was stronger, clearer. The girl gasped softly, rushing to the bedside. "She's trying," she whispered. The man hurried over, his heart pounding. The patient's eyes flickered beneath her eyelids, her lips twitching as though trying to form a word. "Sweetheart, it's Dad," he said quickly, leaning close. "You can do it." "I'm here." The monitors beeped faster. The nurses came in again, astonished. "She's responding to stimuli," one of them said. "Her brain activity is increasing." The billionaire turned to the homeless girl, tears filling his eyes. "You're doing it," he said. "She's coming back." But the girl shook her head. "It's not me. It's love. It's you. She can feel you here every day." That night, when everyone left, the man found himself unable to stop thinking about what she had said. Love. Such a simple word. Yet it held more power than all the money and medicine in the world. He had spent years building walls around himself, becoming someone people feared more than admired. But now, sitting beside his fragile daughter and a homeless girl who had nothing yet gave everything, he realized how empty power really was without kindness. A few days later, the doctors declared her condition promising. The news spread quietly through the hospital. Even people who didn't know the family began whispering about the strange girl who helped a billionaire's daughter wake up. Reporters started gathering outside, but the man refused to speak to them. He didn't want fame or headlines. He wanted peace, and for his daughter to open her eyes fully. That evening, he found the girl outside near the garden, feeding crumbs to a small bird perched on the bench. "They trust you," he said softly, watching her. She smiled. "Animals can sense when someone won't hurt them. People used to say that about me too long ago." He sat beside her. "You've done more for my daughter than any doctor could. I want to help you now. Please let me," she hesitated. "Help me how?" "Find you a home," he said. "A place to stay, food, clothes, anything you need." "You deserve that." Her smile faded slightly. I don't want a home that feels borrowed, she said quietly. Maybe later. But not now, he frowned.
Why not?
Because she's not fully awake yet, she said. When she opens her eyes, then I'll go. That will be enough for me. He wanted to argue, but the calm conviction in her voice stopped him. When she left that night, he watched her walk into the darkness, her figure fading under the streetlights. For a moment, he thought about how strange life could be. A girl with nothing had somehow become his only source of hope. Back in the room, he sat beside his daughter again. Her hand felt warmer, her breathing steady. He spoke softly. You have to wake up soon, sweetheart. Someone very special is waiting for you. Then he closed his eyes, whispering a quiet thank you to the girl who had walked into his life from the rain. Someone who reminded him what it meant to be human. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the night sky, and somewhere in the distance the homeless girl kept walking, her heart lighter than it had been in years, knowing she had already changed one life forever. But she didn't know yet. Her journey with this family wasn't over. Something even greater was waiting ahead, something that would tie their fates together in a way none of them could yet imagine. The next few days were unlike anything the billionaire had experienced before. The hospital room, which once felt like a cage of sadness, now carried a soft kind of warmth. The homeless girl, whom everyone had once looked at with suspicion, had become a regular face in the building. She came early, carrying a small notebook and a quiet smile, and sat beside the girl's bed like she belonged there. Nurses who had first frowned now greeted her with a nod. Even the doctors had stopped questioning her presence, though no one could explain what she was doing or why the patient seemed to respond to her. The billionaire watched everything silently. Every day he stood at the corner of the room, pretending to check his phone, though his eyes never left the bed. He didn't want to admit it, but his heart had started to hope again. Each time the homeless girl spoke, something about her voice filled the air differently, gentle but full of life. She talked about little things, stories from her childhood, stories of people she met while living on the streets. They were stories filled with hardship, yet there was always a spark of hope in them. Sometimes she would sing softly, a tune that had no words, just hums that rose and fell like the wind. The billionaire would close his eyes for a moment, and it felt as if the room itself was breathing again. One afternoon, as the homeless girl sat by the bed, the billionaire noticed something unusual. The girl's fingers, his daughter's fingers, moved slightly. It was only for a moment, but it wasn't his imagination. His heart began to race. He stepped forward and whispered her name, but there was no other movement. He looked toward the homeless girl, and she smiled quietly, saying, "She hears us. It's small, but she hears." The billionaire felt a lump in his throat. For weeks he had prayed for a sign, even the smallest one. Now it was here, and it had come from someone he would have never expected. That night the billionaire couldn't sleep. He sat by the window of his office at home, looking out at the city lights. The noise of traffic, the glow of skyscrapers, everything looked the same, but inside him, something had shifted. He thought about all the money he had spent, the doctors he had called from around the world, the machines and medicines that filled his daughter's room. Yet it was this quiet girl who had nothing, who had somehow brought a spark of life back. He asked himself a question that wouldn't leave his mind. What did she have that others didn't? The next morning, when he arrived at the hospital, he found her already there, sitting beside his daughter. She was reading aloud from a small book she carried in her bag. Her voice was calm and steady. When she noticed him, she looked up and smiled. "Good morning, sir. She slept peacefully last night." He nodded and pulled a chair near her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the machines filled the silence. Then he finally asked, "Why do you come every day?" "You don't have to. You owe us nothing." She looked at him with a kind of sadness in her eyes. "Because I know what it's like to sit beside someone you love and feel helpless," she said softly. Sometimes words from the heart reach places medicine can't. The billionaire stared at her, unsure what to say. There was something in her tone that made him think there was more to her story, but he didn't ask. He didn't want to disturb whatever magic she seemed to bring with her. Over the next week, small changes began to appear. The doctors were cautious, saying the brain sometimes showed delayed responses, but even they couldn't hide their surprise. The patient's pulse was stronger, her breathing more natural. Occasionally, her lips moved faintly as if she was trying to say something. Each time, the homeless girl would hold her hand and whisper, It's okay, take your time. You're doing well. The billionaire started believing again. He began to smile more, to greet people, even to talk to the nurses with gratitude. Everyone noticed the change, not only in the girl in the bed, but in the man himself. One afternoon, the homeless girl brought something different. It was a small music player, an old one with scratches all over. It used to belong to my little sister, she said. She loved music. I thought maybe it could help here too. The billionaire didn't ask questions. He just nodded and helped her place it near the bed. When she pressed play, a soft melody filled the room. It was the kind of song that made you remember things you didn't even realize you'd forgotten. Warm days, laughter, small moments that once felt unimportant. The billionaire found himself lost in it. The homeless girl began humming along, her voice blending with the tune. Then, for the first time in months, something extraordinary happened. The billionaire's daughter's eyelids fluttered just a little. The homeless girl noticed it immediately. She didn't shout or panic. She simply kept singing, her hand resting gently on the girl's arm. The billionaire froze, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the sound of the machines. And then, slowly, the girl's hand moved again, more clearly this time. The billionaire called for the doctors, his voice trembling with disbelief. They rushed in, checked the monitors, adjusted the machines, but the homeless girl didn't stop singing. Her voice stayed steady, calm, filled with warmth that seemed to wrap around the room. The doctors exchanged looks, unable to explain what was happening. That night, after everyone left, the billionaire sat alone in the hospital room. He watched his daughter's face, peaceful but alive in a way he hadn't seen for so long. He turned to the homeless girl who was sitting quietly with her hands folded. "Who are you, really?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "Just someone who knows that love can wake even the deepest sleep." He didn't know how to respond, but he knew one thing for certain. This girl had changed everything. Days passed and the progress continued. His daughter's fingers moved more often. Her lips formed small shapes as if trying to speak. The doctors couldn't believe it. They began recording her reactions, calling it an unexpected recovery. But the billionaire knew there was nothing medical about it. This was something deeper, something only the heart could understand. Every morning he waited for the homeless girl to arrive. He started talking to her more, learning little things about her life. She never spoke about her past much, but whenever she did, her voice carried a quiet sadness. She said she once had someone close to her who fell sick, and that was when she learned how much words could matter. Sometimes she brought small flowers from outside and placed them near the bed. Sometimes she told stories about people she met while wandering the city. Each story ended with hope, no matter how dark it began. It was as if she knew exactly what the sleeping girl needed to hear. One morning, the billionaire came in earlier than usual. He found the homeless girl already there, holding his daughter's hand and whispering softly. The room felt lighter, brighter. The sun filtered through the window, and for a second it looked as if time itself had paused. He stood at the door, not wanting to disturb them, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Later that day, he walked out of the hospital and looked at the people passing by. For the first time, he noticed them, not as strangers, but as lives, each carrying their own story. He thought about how he had spent his life chasing success, yet none of it could fix what mattered most. It took a girl who had nothing to remind him that life wasn't measured by what you own, but by what you give. That evening, when he returned, the nurses greeted him with wide smiles. "Sir," one of them said, "your daughter's eyes moved today. It was brief, but it happened." He turned to look at the homeless girl who stood silently in the corner. She didn't look surprised. She just whispered, "I told you." "She's listening." For the first time, the billionaire broke down. He didn't cry out loud, but silent tears rolled down his face as he held the homeless girl's hands and whispered, "Thank you." She shook her head. "Don't thank me. Thank her for fighting. I just reminded her what love sounds like." And in that quiet hospital room, filled with machines and soft light, a miracle had begun. Not just in the body of a sleeping girl, but in the heart of a father who was learning what truly mattered. The morning sunlight slipped through the hospital curtains, soft and golden. The billionaire sat by his daughter's bedside, his hand resting gently on hers. For the first time in months, there was peace on her face, as if the long sleep she'd been trapped in was finally beginning to fade. Her breathing was steady, her fingers moved every now and then, and hope, Real hope filled the room like a quiet melody. The homeless girl sat in the corner, humming softly to herself. She looked calm, but there was a deep emotion behind her eyes. She had been there every single day, giving everything she had. Not money or gifts, but something far more powerful. Her voice, her time, her heart. The billionaire watched her carefully. He had seen many people in his life, powerful men, doctors, investors, but none of them had done what she did. She had given warmth where science had failed. She had spoken to his daughter like she was still there, like her spirit hadn't left the world yet. And somehow, that belief had pulled his daughter back. Later that afternoon, the billionaire stood outside the room, talking quietly to one of the doctors. "She's improving faster than we thought," the doctor said. "It's almost hard to explain. Her brain activity was quiet for weeks, and now it's responding in ways we didn't expect." The billionaire nodded, though his eyes stayed on the closed door. He knew what the doctor meant but didn't say. They couldn't explain what love could do. They didn't have words for the strength that came from human connection. When he returned to the room, the homeless girl was speaking softly again, telling his daughter another story. "Once there was a little girl who lost her way in a big city," she said. She had no one, and she thought no one cared. But one day someone smiled at her, a stranger, and that small kindness made her believe she could keep going. The billionaire stood silently listening. Every word she spoke seemed to come from her soul. And then something happened that made his breath catch. His daughter's eyes began to flicker. It was small at first, like a dreamer trying to wake from a long dream. Then slowly her eyelids lifted. Her gaze was unfocused, hazy but alive. The billionaire froze, unable to move or even breathe. The homeless girl leaned closer, whispering gently, "You're safe. You're home." The girl blinked, confusion passing through her eyes, and then she turned her head slightly. Her lips moved, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad," that one word broke him. Tears streamed down his face as he reached for her hand, clutching it tightly. "I'm here," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm here, sweetheart." Nurses rushed in, followed by doctors. The room filled with quiet chaos, machines beeping, voices overlapping. But in the middle of it all, the billionaire and the homeless girl stayed by the bed, hands joined in disbelief. The doctors confirmed what everyone could see. She was awake. Weak, confused, but awake. The billionaire couldn't stop crying. He hadn't cried like that in years. All the fear, pain, and exhaustion of the past weeks poured out of him. And when he finally looked up, he saw the homeless girl standing quietly by the window, smiling through her own tears. In the days that followed, the hospital became a place of joy. The billionaire's daughter slowly regained her strength, learning to speak and move again. The nurses called it a miracle. The billionaire called it a blessing, and he knew who to thank. He asked the homeless girl to stay close to help his daughter through recovery. At first, she refused. "I don't want to interfere," she said gently. "She needs her family now," but he wouldn't hear of it. "You are part of this family now," he said firmly. "You brought her back when no one else could." Reluctantly, she agreed. Every day she came to visit, bringing her quiet laughter and gentle warmth. The daughter, still weak but smiling, grew attached to her. They talked about everything, music, life, dreams. There was an easy bond between them, something pure and beautiful. One evening, when the billionaire's daughter had fallen asleep, he asked the homeless girl to sit with him in the small hospital cafe. The place was quiet, with only a few people scattered around. He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "I still don't understand how you did it," he said softly. "Every expert in the world tried and nothing worked. But you walked in and changed everything." The homeless girl smiled faintly, looking down at the cup of tea in her hands. "It wasn't me, sir," she said. "It was her heart. I just helped her remember she wasn't alone." The billionaire leaned forward. "But how did you know what to say? How did you know how to reach her?" Her voice softened as she answered. "Because I once had someone who didn't wake up either. My little sister." She paused for a moment, taking a breath before continuing. "We were poor. We couldn't afford treatment. I used to sit beside her every night and talk to her, sing to her, hoping she'd open her eyes. One day she did, just for a moment. She smiled at me and said my name. And then she was gone." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. "After that, I promised myself that if I ever met someone else lost in that kind of silence, I would try again. Because maybe someone somewhere would get the chance my sister didn't."